Hey guys, what's going on? So in this video, we'll be learning about class methods and static methods. Now, so far we have only learned about the basic method, which takes in the object as the argument. Okay, so this code right here is the extension from the previous code. So this is the same code that we wrote in the previous video where we were learning about the class variables. So let me actually go ahead and delete this because we don't need that. And before we begin, let me tell you that only prerequisite to this video is a topic called decorators. Now I have a video about decorators. If you want to watch it, you can go ahead and click at the link in the description below, or you can click at the card which appears at the top right corner. Okay, so let me go ahead and delete this one as well. All right, so far we have created two objects of employee class Adam and Bob, and we have a class variable boss which has a string Jacob. Cool. Now let's talk a little bit about the class method. Now class method by default takes in the argument of class in its first place. Now remember, in the basic method we take the object as the first argument, while in class method we take the class as the first argument. Well, where do we use class method? We use class methods to set the class variables. All right, so let's go ahead and quickly create a class method. Say define set boss name, and as I told you, by default it takes the class as the first argument, and we do have a convention for it, and the convention is the CLS. And apart from that, you can pass other arguments. So let's pass the boss name, and inside it we can edit the class variable by saying CLS dot boss equals to boss name that we passed. Cool. Now this right here is no different from the ordinary method that you can see right there, because as I told you earlier, self is just a convention and CLS is also a convention. So till now, set boss name is not a class method yet. It's the same as the basic method that we used. Now if you want to make this as a class method, you have to add a decorator called the class method. Now this is no more an ordinary method, it is now a class method. Now cool, how do we call this class method? If you want to call this class method, there are two ways. First way is the very logical way, by using the class. So let's call this class method by employee dot, then you can access the class method, and we named it as set boss name. And as I told you, by default it accepts the class name, so we don't need to pass it, and we can directly pass the boss name, say Amy. And let's go ahead and print the object's boss name, so adam.boss and bob.boss. Okay, so let me show you. Let me go ahead and copy this and paste it over here. Now at this point you can see we already have the boss, which is Jacob. If I go ahead and run this, before setting the boss name as Amy, it would print Jacob, which is already the boss, and after this we have successfully changed this boss to Amy, so it will print out Amy as answer. Let's go ahead and run this and see the answer. There you go, it printed exactly as we expected. Now the other way of accessing the boss name class method is through the objects. So you can pass any objects, either Adam or boss. Let me go ahead and quickly type Adam and run this. It will still print as the same answer. And if I go ahead and type Bob, it would still print as the same answer. But the only thing is that it doesn't really make sense, right? So calling via the object name and setting the class variable, it's not really a good practice. So we actually make use of the class name itself to call in the class method. Now you might be wondering, well, we have already provided the boss variable, and that's why it is able to set the boss name, right? Well, if I go ahead and delete this, let me go ahead and comment this out. Now you notice that if you don't have the boss variable, class variable, upon calling the boss name method or any class method, it will set or create the class variable for you. Now here we don't have boss right now, so these two lines would actually throw me an error. So let me go ahead and run this. Let me pull this up a little bit and let me run this. So it will say it doesn't have this variable. Employee object has no attribute boss. Now notice, let me delete this, or let me comment this out, and now let me go ahead and run this. You will notice that boss variable will be set and the name of that boss is Amy. There you go. Now all of you who might have thought earlier that the purpose of class method is simply to set a class variable which already exists, well, now you might have got the answer. So basically class methods can set the class variables for you, whether it's declared or not. And there are two ways to access the class method. First is by using the class name, which is the preferred way. And the second way is through the object, which is not preferred and does not make any sense. Okay, so and before we move on to the another aspect of class method, class method by default takes in the class as the first argument. Now this is by default a convention, CLS. You can name it anything you want, so I can name it like class. Now if I add another S, it won't be accepted because class is a keyword that we already use, so it will throw me an error. So you can also use this as well, but I like to stick with the convention, so let me go and rename it as S. Cool. Now another way we use class method is to use it as an alternative constructor. Now what do you mean by alternative constructor? Let me go ahead and delete all this. See, what happens is sometimes when you are dealing with the real world data, they won't be provided you as an object, or you can say an discrete variables like Adam 1 2 3 and 24, just an instance. It would be something like of this form. Say if you want to get a data of Adam, it would be something like Adam comma 1 2 3 comma 24, and this would be as a string. Sometimes you'll be provided with these data and you have to create the object from them. Now for these cases, we make use of the class method and set it to act as an alternative constructor. So let's go ahead and apply that. So let me go ahead and delete all this, and let's keep Adam as the reference. All right, and let me create another class method. Say class method alternative constructor. All right, so one more thing to notice that whenever you're creating an alternative constructor, you do have another convention. So you should start them with a word, say from, and then an underscore. So it's another convention. So I am telling you all the good practices that are being followed in the industry, so that you too follow it and implement it in your daily application or daily projects. So by default, it takes in the class as the first argument, and let's leave this for now. So let's pass this. Cool. Now, as I told you that many times you'll be provided with some data like in a string format, like Adam and his ID as 1 2 3 and his age as 24 as a single string. Now you have to manually create objects from these strings. Now to do these kind of stuff, we can manipulate class method to act as an alternative constructor, and let me show you exactly that. All right, so let's say we have a object string as the Adam, his ID and his age. Now we have to create an Adam object, say Adam, from this object string. So let me actually do this, and we'll come back to it and modify this variable. All right, so now let's go ahead and define the alternative constructor. So by default takes the class as the first argument, and we will take the object string. So let's take it as a string, and let's define what goes inside. Now since we know that we are getting a string like this, let's go ahead and split them into three variables, say name, ID and age, and let's go ahead and split the string that we got, like string dot split on the basis of comma. All right, so what all I did was I just took this string and I split it on the basis of this comma right here. Now if I split it, it will convert it into something like Adam 1 2 3 and 24, and each of these elements are actually a string. So basically it's a list of string, and we can actually access these through name, ID and age. And let me actually forget about the intricacies, like we have to typecast age into int and ID into int. Let's actually forget that. Now this name will get the value Adam, ID will get the value 1 2 3 and age will get the value 24. If you're having any sort of doubt what exactly split is doing here and things like that, I have a video on strings. You can go ahead and give it a watch if you'd like. All right, now we need to return an object which is actually this, right? Class name and then its attributes, right? Now you can do that since you have passed class inside. You can easily do that by returning the class and then passing these attributes in. So we have attribute name, ID and age. Now this would successfully create an object for you. Now we are not over yet. Now we have to call this alternative constructor. Now in order to call that, let me actually go ahead and remove this dummy initialization, and you can call it, as I told you before, by using a class name and then the class method name. So the class method name is from alternative constructor, and by default the class name is passed, so we have to only pass the object string, right? Now if I go ahead and run this, it won't throw me any sort of error. That's because we have successfully created the object and everything is fine and properly executed. Now let's go ahead and check this out, right? So let's go ahead and print Adam's ID. If it prints 1 2 3, then we have successfully created the object. There you go. Now let's go ahead and create the Bob's object as well. So obj string 2 equals to Bob, and we can say its ID as 234 and his age is something like 32 maybe. And let's go ahead and create the object for Bob as well. Bob object is equal to, let's call the class and convert this string to an object by passing object string 2. And let's go ahead and print the Bob's ID as well. So it should print 1 2 3 and 2 3 4. There you go. Now this was how you use class method as an alternative constructor. Now I know that this concept is a little bit hard to sink in, so if you have any doubt all the way through, you can go ahead, rewind back and watch the video from the beginning and pause it and experiment with it. I highly recommend you to do this because it really helps you to understand the concepts much better. All right, so that was all about the class methods. Now let's quickly move on to the static method, and believe me, static method is very simple and it's the shortest part of this video. So let me quickly go ahead and remove all this because we don't need that, and let me go ahead and remove this as well. All right, so now before moving on to static method, let's understand what exactly static method is. So we so far understood about the basic method, which by default takes in the object as the first argument, and then we discussed about the class method, which takes in the class as the first argument. And now let's talk about the static method, which does not take any first argument by default. So in classes, we do have functions which does not take a particular argument by default, which can be an instance or a class. Now these methods exist to create a logical implementation of some aspect, and these functions are denoted by the static method decorator, just like the class method one. So go ahead and type static method, and if I define a function like test and leave it empty, and let's pass this. Now you can call a static method by using a class name or an object name, say employee.test and see. So let me go ahead and clear the screen, and if I go ahead and run it, it did not throw any sort of error. Now notice if I replace this with a class method, so if I go ahead and run it, it expects class, and if I just don't put anything, go ahead and let me quickly create an object, say Adam equals to Adam, his ID 1 2 3 and his age is 24. Now if I go ahead and access the test using the object, you notice that it still expects the first argument as the object. Let me go ahead and delete all this. All right, so by just putting a static method decorator, it doesn't expect you to pass anything by default. Now as I told you before, static methods are used to implement some logics or maybe implement things that does not essentially require you to pass in a class or an object. So let me quickly rename this as a greet method, which will actually greet people, or you can say the entire batch. Let me print out hello and welcome, and let me actually pass the department actually. So let me put it as DEPT, and let me pass DEPT over here as well. And let's actually go ahead and call this method by employee.greet, and let's pass the string, say software engineering batch. So or you can say department. So if I go ahead and run this, it will print me hello and welcome. All right, so I forgot to put f string over here. If let me go ahead and run this again, hello and welcome software engineering. So, and it did not take the object as the first argument by default, either class or instance as the first argument. So if I go ahead and run it via an object too, it would still print me the same answer. Cool. So that's all for this video. I hope you really understood about the class method and static method. Now class method takes in the class as the first argument, and you can use it to set the class variables, or you can use it to initialize the class variables. Also, you can use the class method as an alternative constructor. Now, static methods, they don't take specifically any arguments by default. You can use static methods to connect some logical aspects in your class, maybe to implement something that does not take in essentially the class or the object instance by default. All right, so that's all for this video. If you really enjoyed this video, make sure to support us by hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. You can also support us by spreading the words to others who really want to learn more about Python and other tech stack. We would gladly able to help them, and this would also help us to grow our channel. And I would like to thank you all because we have successfully completed the 50 subscriber milestone, and it's all possible because of you. Keep supporting us. We really love your engagement, and thanks for watching. See you guys in the next video.